Hey guys, tonight we begin a quiet journey, a slow drift into the heart of simplicity, of longing, and of enough. You've been running all day, tasks unfinished, conversations replaying, a mind tugged in 1,000 directions. But here, in the hush between dusk and sleep, you find yourself standing at the edge of something softer, something older, a place where wanting less might just give you more. A gentle reminder before we start. You will never control the world, but you can learn to govern your inner state. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, feel free to comment with where you're listening from and what time it is by your clock. I love seeing how this little circle of quiet stretches across time zones and continents. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing near the shore. It's not a beach of vacationers or golden sands, but a weathered coast, a place where the ocean is a constant, patient presence. There's a dock creaking softly and a wooden boat rocking gently, tied to a post. The salt in the air doesn't sting, it just is. You walk along the waterline, bare feet pressing into damp sand, and then you see him, the old fisherman. He's sitting by a fire made of driftwood, hands folded, gaze far away. He doesn't look surprised to see you. In fact, it almost feels like he's been waiting. He gestures to the space beside him and you sit. Strange, he says without turning. How the sea always gives, yet people think it takes. His voice is soft, but the words reach you deeply. You're not sure why yet, but something in them clings to a part of you that's tired. Tired of more news, more plans, more everything. You ask him gently about his life. He doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he lifts a small stone from the sand and tosses it into the water. The ripple fans out, almost invisible in the vastness. I once chased things, he begins. Even out here. Thought I was above all that, living with the tides and fish and sky. But wanting can take many shapes. Sometimes it looks like ambition, other times like fear. He tells you that there was a time when he was content with very little. A net, a boat, and the rhythm of the day. Fish in the morning, rest in the afternoon. Stories with neighbors at dusk. But something changed, and like a wave building quietly, that change came not as thunder but as suggestion. It starts small, he says. A whisper, shouldn't you have more? Not because you're unhappy, but because you could. You glance at him. The fire casts soft light on the lines of his face, the quiet wisdom in his eyes. He doesn't look like a man defeated, but like someone who has walked both shores of life and chosen to sit between them. Some Stoics, he says, say that peace comes when you stop measuring by what you lack. Others argue that true virtue is tested only when tempted with more. And there it is, your first brush with a Stoic paradox. Can you truly be free if you've never had to walk away from desire? The old man leans back, listening to the night. A breeze lifts the edges of your thoughts, loosening some of the day's knots. You think of your own life, the pace, the pressure. How often more is sold to you, not with malice but with a smile, more success, more control, more comfort, as if you were incomplete without them. And yet here is this man, worn by wind and salt, speaking to you not of glory, but of enough. He points to the sea. The ocean doesn't apologize for its depth, nor does it beg for recognition. It simply is. You close your eyes. You try to feel that same stillness inside yourself, and for a moment you do. He tells you that when he was young, he thought being poor meant being powerless. But now he sees poverty of the soul is far more dangerous than poverty of things. He pauses. You know what's strange? He asks. The most beautiful days out here weren't when I caught the most fish or made the best trade. They were the days the boat drifted and I just listened. The fire cracks. The stars have come out, silent and generous. Tonight, you're not being taught a lesson. You're being invited into a remembering, a way of living that doesn't perform, doesn't grasp, doesn't hunger. The old fisherman says nothing more for now. The silence between you is full, not empty. You look out over the water. The tide is coming in slowly, And without meaning to, you breathe a little deeper. The fire has dimmed and the old man stirs slightly beside you. He doesn't speak right away, and you find yourself matching his silence, watching the waves lap at the shore in steady rhythm. You think back to your own days, the noise, the rush, the to-do lists that seem to stretch past the horizon. But here the seconds feel wider. They don't rush toward an end. They simply arrive, and pass, and arrive again. "Let me take you back," the fisherman finally says, voice low, like a whisper the ocean might carry. "Back to when the world was smaller, when this village lived on quiet days and predictable tides." He begins to speak of a time when the village was not even on the map. Just a smattering of huts, a dozen boats, and people who had learned how to let the sea teach them patience. You walk through the story in your mind's eye, like tracing the shape of a memory you never lived. There are children chasing chickens down sandy paths, elderly women gutting fish with graceful efficiency, nets drying on wooden frames. Laughter, not the loud kind, but the warm, low hum that settles into your bones. The fisherman was young then. His days began before the sun and ended with salted hands and tired muscles, and he loved it. There was no competition, no scale to measure one another. You caught what you caught. You traded or shared. And you rested, he says. That simplicity wasn't romantic. It was real. Sometimes the fish were scarce. Sometimes the storms came early. But there was a rhythm, a trust in the cycle of things. The villagers knew. Not every tide would be generous, but another would follow. You reflect on this and wonder how often you've ignored your own rhythms. How often you fought your fatigue, guilted yourself for resting, measured your worth against someone else's highlight reel. "It's funny," the fisherman says, "how we once had everything but didn't call it that." He recalls how time stretched long in those days. People spoke without checking the clock. Arguments ended before sundown because no one wanted to carry bitterness into sleep. The village didn't chase growth, it chased alignment, with nature, with one another, with themselves. You notice a feeling rise in you. A kind of grief, maybe, for a life you don't live, for a kind of ease you were told was laziness, for a kind of contentment that's become foreign. He nods, sensing your shift without needing to hear it. We lived slowly, but not idly. That's what people misunderstand. Slowness is not sloth. It's intention. It's choosing not to sprint toward a finish line that doesn't exist. You hear the Stoic thread in that thought. Epictetus taught that we should align with nature, our nature. That doesn't just mean the trees and rivers. It means the rhythms of your mind, your spirit, your needs. A life out of sync, even if it's fast and full, becomes hollow. You ask him if he ever dreamed of leaving, of going beyond the edge of the village to seek more. "Of course," he smiles. "Every young man wonders what's over the next hill, but here's the trick. Sometimes that wondering is sacred, and sometimes it's just restlessness wearing a mask. That lands like a quiet bell inside you. How many of your ambitions were truly yours? How many were borrowed desires, fed to you by ads, by expectations, by people who never asked what you truly needed?" The fisherman leans forward and pokes at the fire. Sparks flutter up like fireflies. "One year," he continues, "there was talk of connecting the village by road. Some thought it would bring trade. Others feared it would bring change. We didn't know then what the cost would be." He doesn't finish that thought yet. Instead, he lets it linger, like a wave pulling back before the surge. You walk through the village in your mind again, seeing its narrow paths and bamboo fences, hearing the simple conversations held without phones, the music of crickets, the hush of understanding between neighbors. "What we had," he says, "wasn't wealth, but it was full. Life can be full without being crowded." You think of the spaces you've tried to fill, with things, with noise, with achievements, and you wonder, did they make you feel full or just distracted? Marcus Aurelius, the fisherman murmurs, was emperor of the known world, and he still wrote to remind himself not to be seduced by power. Can you imagine? A man with legions at his command, needing to remind himself to be humble, to be simple, to be kind. He chuckles softly, as if the absurdity of it is both tragic and human. If even an emperor must wrestle with excess, what hope do the rest of us have? You laugh with him, but not unkindly. There's comfort in the shared folly of humankind. Maybe freedom isn't in never stumbling, but in knowing how to return. And that's what this village was, a kind of returning. A place you came back to not because it had more, but because it asked less of you. The fire is low now. The sea still murmurs, constant, unconcerned. The fisherman leans back, eyes closed. You know what I miss the most? The space between things, between work and rest, between meal and sleep, between speaking and listening. You understand what he means. There's a kind of sacred silence that today's world has exiled. But here it still breathes. And as the stars wheel overhead and the night wraps gently around your shoulders, you begin to remember it too, that ancient rhythm, that forgotten ease, and it feels like coming home. The night deepens. The fire has turned to embers now, warm but dim. The old fisherman pulls a woolen shawl over his shoulders and gestures toward the darkness beyond the waves. There was a time, he says slowly, when I believed the future would save me. That if I just worked hard enough, if I caught enough fish, built a sturdier boat, saved a little more, something better would come. You feel those words settle inside you, like a low tide revealing what's always been there. He continues, it wasn't greed, at least not the kind with sharp teeth. It was subtler, a soft hunger, the illusion that the next moment, just the next one, held the peace this one didn't. And you understand, because you've lived in that space, too, half in, half out, looking ahead with hope and anxiety braided together, striving for something just out of reach. Not because you're dissatisfied, but because you've been taught that satisfaction is dangerous, that it signals stagnation. The fisherman pauses, watching your face in the glow. It's hard to live as if now is enough, he admits, especially when the world keeps telling you more is waiting. If you just keep going. You think of the Stoic principle that echoes here, the one that whispers, the present moment is all you have. The past is memory. The future is a projection. This breath, this heartbeat, this feeling of sand beneath your hand, this is the only certainty you own. And yet, your mind so often lives somewhere else. It was the dry season, the fisherman continues, when it all began to change. Fewer fish, more traders arriving from outside, people talking about prices instead of weather. The village shifted, slowly then all at once. More goods came in, more opportunity, more comparisons. Suddenly, he says, people who were once content began to ask, why don't I have what they have? You nod, that feeling is familiar. The way contentment erodes not from hardship but from contrast. From seeing someone else's highlight and thinking it's your shortcoming. It's not wrong to want, he adds gently. Desire is natural, but unexamined desire, that's where suffering begins. You feel that in your chest, a slow ache where your ambitions live. He talks of a neighbor, Zhao, who had once been the calmest man in the village. A man who sang while mending nets and never rushed a conversation. But when the outsiders came with their gadgets and promises, Zhao began to ask, why not me? He started working longer hours, bought a motor for his boat, then a radio, then a cooler for fish storage. One by one, he gathered things he never used before. And he smiled less, the fisherman says quietly. Not because he was in pain, but because his mind was elsewhere, always reaching. It's a familiar story, not tragic, not heroic, just real. A gentle drift from simplicity to striving. Seneca once warned, the old man muses, that wealth without wisdom is a burden, like giving a blade to a child. It will only harm. You reflect on that. How often abundance, when untempered by clarity, becomes clutter. How the pursuit of more can fill your life while hollowing your soul. But isn't growth good? Isn't progress natural? You ask him that, he smiles, not dismissively but knowingly. Yes, he says. But there's a difference between growing deeper and growing wider, between roots and sprawl. He picks up a shell and rolls it between his fingers. The sea doesn't grow by rushing, it deepens by erosion, slowly, patiently. It becomes vast not by wanting, but by being. That metaphor sticks. You wonder, are you becoming deeper or just busier? The conversation fades into stillness. For a long time you both sit without words. Just the soft breath of the ocean and the crackle of dying embers. Then, in the quiet, he says something almost to himself. Wealth is not having more, it's needing less. You turn that thought over, again and again, like a pebble in your palm. Needing less. What would that look like in your life? What would it free you from? There's a kind of freedom in limits, a kind of elegance in restraint, not the restraint that punishes, but the one that clarifies. The Stoics called this apatheia, not apathy, but peace from unnecessary desire, a state where the soul is undisturbed because it is aligned, clear. But, he adds, don't mistake this for resignation. It's not about giving up. It's about seeing clearly, acting where you can and letting go where you can't. Another paradox gently offered. Surrender as strength, clarity as courage. You remember something else Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal, though here it floats to you not as a quote but as a truth you've always known. That your happiness depends on the quality of your thoughts. And tonight, your thoughts are simpler, slower, quieter. Because sitting here with an old man and a fading fire, you're beginning to remember something the modern world tried to make you forget. You were never broken, you were just distracted. The fisherman leans back, eyes on the stars. You know, he says, the sea doesn't ask for anything, it offers. You take what you need, and you give something back. You ask what he gave back. A life, he answers. A life not of extravagance or acclaim, but of presence, of service to something larger, of moments strung together not for display but for depth. The tide comes a little closer, and you feel a strange lightness in your chest. Like maybe, needing less isn't a loss. Maybe it's the beginning of joy. The tide has crept almost to your toes now, gentle and bold in its own way, like it knows no other path but forward and back, back and forward. You draw your knees closer to your chest, and the fisherman watches you with a kind of softness that only years can teach. Do you remember, he asks, the first time you failed and thought it meant you were less? The question isn't pointed. It's soft like a touch on the shoulder, but it opens something in you nonetheless. You do remember, not the exact moment maybe, but the feeling, the sting, that silent voice whispering, "You're not enough." He nods slowly, as if he can see that memory play across your face. We all carry those early missteps like bruises that never fully fade. You ask if he ever failed, he chuckles. I failed more than I succeeded, but here's the thing, they weren't really failures. Not in the way I was told to see them. You lean in. He tells you of a stormy night, his net torn, his boat nearly capsized. He'd made a reckless decision to chase one more school of fish as clouds gathered on the horizon. He ignored the warning signs, thought he could outrun nature. I lost a week's catch, he says, came home soaked and empty-handed. For days he couldn't meet the eyes of the elders. He thought he'd proven himself foolish, irresponsible. But no one scolded him, no one even pitied him. They just handed me another net, he says, and said, next time listen better. You smile at the gentleness of that. They weren't telling me not to try, he clarifies. They were telling me to learn, to adjust, to become wiser. The mistake wasn't the storm, it was the arrogance of thinking I could control it. That lands in you like a dropped pebble in still water. The ripples it makes are familiar. Control. It always comes back to control. You remember the Stoic principle, dichotomy of control. There are things within your power, and there are things outside of it. Your task is to know the difference, to act where you can, and to release where you must. But we don't like that, the fisherman says. We want guarantees. We want the storm to obey our calendar, the sea to match our schedule. He looks at you, one eyebrow raised. And when it doesn't, we call it failure. But maybe it's just nature being nature. You think of all the times your plans fell apart. The job that didn't happen, the person who left, the goals that proved too heavy to carry, and you wonder, were they failures or were they invitations? He pokes at the embers again. They glow briefly before dimming. A younger version of me believed success was about catching the most fish. Now, I know it's about knowing when not to cast the net. That metaphor stirs something inside you. Because you've cast nets out of desperation, out of habit, out of fear that being still meant being left behind. But stillness, he says, reading your silence, is often where the best insights rise. You won't see your reflection in a storm, only in calm water. You pause there, allowing the image to settle. Calm water, a mirror to the soul. He tells you of another time, a deal gone wrong with the first outsider traders. He and others sold their fish for too little, dazzled by new currency and smooth words. It took them months to recover. But we weren't angry, he says, because we saw what we had lacked, discernment, so we taught the young ones. We adjusted our systems. We grew, not out of shame, but out of experience. That's another Stoic truth. Wisdom is born from lived moments, not imagined ones. Philosophy isn't abstract, it's practical. It shows up in the everyday, how you respond to loss, to delay, to disappointment. You remember how Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The fisherman hasn't read Marcus, but he's lived it. What stands in the way becomes the way, you whisper. He smiles. Exactly. You look out at the sea again and something has shifted. It's still vast, still untamable, but it no longer feels threatening. It feels honest, like failure itself. Not a verdict, but a version of truth. A reflection of where you are, not a condemnation of who you are. You know what the worst kind of failure is? He asks gently. You shake your head. Success that makes you forget yourself. That one stings. Because maybe you've had that kind of success before. The one that's impressive on paper but hollow in your heart. The one that made others applaud but left you wondering who you had to become to earn it. He continues, better to fail while being true than to win while pretending. A quiet breeze lifts the edge of his shawl. You wonder, what would your life look like if you redefined failure? If you saw it not as the enemy, but as the sculptor shaping your form? You remember Epictetus again. Don't seek for things to happen the way you want them to. Rather, wish that what happens happens the way it does. Then you will be happy. You think of all the storms you've fought, all the nets you've thrown, and you ask yourself, did those moments break you or shape you? Maybe both. Maybe that's the point. The fisherman closes his eyes, sighs deeply. Peace, he says, isn't when things go your way. Peace is when you stop insisting that they must. The tide kisses your toes, then retreats, and you realize failure didn't make you less. It made you real. The night is still but not silent. Somewhere a seabird calls in the distance, its cry soft and solitary. The embers have settled into a deep red glow, no longer light but warmth, a quiet companion to your thoughts. You glance over at the fisherman. His eyes are half closed, not asleep, just resting in the way that only someone with nothing to prove can rest. He speaks again, barely louder than the breeze. There was a time I thought freedom came from escape. You wait. I imagined that if I could just sail far enough, past the headlands, past the reef, past everything familiar, I'd find something better, something freer, something untouched by the noise of this world. You recognize the longing, the desire to leave behind the heaviness of expectation, to disappear into possibility. But no matter where I went, he says, I took myself with me. A quiet laugh escapes you. Isn't that the paradox? The thing you try to outrun, the restlessness, the overthinking, the grief, it laces itself into your shadow. You can't sail away from your own mind, he says. And freedom, real freedom, doesn't come from movement. It comes from stillness. You let that settle, not just in your mind but in your chest. Stillness. Not the absence of motion, but the absence of turmoil. You think of Epictetus again, the slave-turned teacher who had less than most and yet seemed freer than kings. He taught that no one is free who is not master of themselves. And you ask yourself, are you master of your inner world, or are you its prisoner? The fisherman seems to sense your thoughts. We think freedom is about having more options, he says, but sometimes it's about having fewer distractions. He reaches into a small pouch and pulls out a smooth stone, worn by time, shaped by the sea. I used to carry this when I was young, he says. I thought it was lucky, that it would bring me fortune on rough days. You hold the stone in your palm, it's nothing special, but it feels like something. I've since realized, he continues, it wasn't the stone, it was the ritual, the reminder, that I had enough, that the ocean could not give me peace until I brought peace to it. Another paradox, another truth. You close your fingers around the stone. We are taught to want, he says, before we are taught to be. And you understand, because you too have lived by the checklist, the milestones, the calendar of achievement, as if crossing off boxes would earn you the right to exhale. But the Stoics taught otherwise. They taught that freedom isn't external. It isn't granted by laws nor bought by wealth. It's a state of the soul. It's the choice to respond instead of react, to withhold judgment, to be content with what is without giving up the will to improve what can be. You ask him if he ever felt trapped. In the village, in the rhythm of fishing and mending and silence. He shrugs, sometimes, but only when I forgot who I was doing it for. You raise an eyebrow. Myself, he clarifies. When I thought I was fishing to impress others, it felt like labor. When I remembered I fished to feed my family and offer something useful, it became sacred. He pokes the fire with a stick. Sparks rise like memories. You ask what he thinks people misunderstand most about freedom. That it looks exciting, he answers. That it's loud, visible, viral, but often it's quiet, it's not scrolling, it's not running, it's not craving. It's saying no without explanation. It's letting the world be noisy while you are not. You think of times you've mistaken stimulation for liberation, of how easily you've confused movement with meaning. He gestures toward the sea. Do you think the ocean is free because it moves, or because it doesn't ask permission? You smile. The latter clearly. He continues, I've known people who traveled across continents and still felt caged. And I've known others who never left this island, and yet carried freedom in their breath. You look out at the dark water, the moonlight tracing a slow silver path across the waves, a path that leads nowhere and everywhere. The philosopher Cleans once said that we should follow the divine law as a dog follows its master, willingly if possible, dragged if necessary. Not because we are slaves to fate, but because resistance to what is only deepens suffering. And perhaps that's part of freedom too, surrendering not in defeat, but in wisdom, choosing your attitude when nothing else is yours to choose. Freedom, the fisherman says softly, is knowing that the storm may come and still choosing not to curse the wind. You breathe that in. It feels like something worth remembering. He leans back, hands behind his head. You want to be free, he asks. Then stop measuring your life by what you can accumulate. Measure it by what you can walk away from. Another paradox, another truth, and it lands like a quiet revolution in your soul, because in this moment you're not chasing, not performing, not escaping. You're simply here. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's the beginning of real freedom. The wind picks up slightly, curling in cool fingers around your ankles. The sound of the ocean deepens, rhythmic and ancient, like a great breath inhaling and exhaling just beyond your reach. The fisherman hasn't moved, but something about him feels more settled now, as if each word spoken peeled away a layer of burden. You stir the embers absently with a stick. The glow pulses, responding to your motion like a heart under skin. You ask a question that's lingered on your tongue for some time now. Do you ever feel disappointed, like you should have done more? The fisherman doesn't rush his answer. He picks up a small seashell, runs a finger along its spiral, then sets it down again. All the time, he says, and never. You raise an eyebrow, he smiles. Both can be true. That's the thing no one tells you about wisdom. It doesn't erase the contradictions. It teaches you how to live inside them. He gestures to the sea again. You see that horizon, always out there, always just beyond reach. It doesn't mean we're failing to touch it. It means it's not meant to be touched. You sit with that. The endless chase. The finish line that moves every time you approach it. The sense that no matter how much you do, how hard you try, there's always another level of more that you haven't yet reached. And yet the Stoics were clear. A wise person is content not because they have all they want, but because they've learned to want what they have. Disappointment, then, is often not about reality, it's about expectation. I used to think, the fisherman continues, that being great meant doing something so large, so lasting, that people would whisper my name for years after I died. He chuckles. Turns out they whisper anyway, but usually about the wrong things. You laugh softly. People whispered about the time I fell asleep on my boat and drifted for hours. He grins. Or the day I mistook a dolphin for a sea spirit. But not once did they talk about the day I saved a boy from drowning. Or the season I gave away half my catch to a widow. He shrugs. I learned to stop measuring my life by what was noticed, and started measuring it by what was needed. You ask how he made peace with being ordinary. He tilts his head. There's nothing ordinary about being present, he says. Most people live like ghosts, haunting the future or clinging to the past. But the now, it's quiet, it's overlooked, and it's the only place where peace lives. You remember the Stoic idea. Fame, like wealth, is not inherently good. It is indifferent. What matters is your judgment of it, and you wonder how many of your disappointments were born from someone else's map. The fisherman points to a star above. You see that one. You nod. It took millions of years for its light to reach us, and yet we look at it as if it belongs to tonight. He turns to you. Don't rush your worth. Don't demand your story make sense right now. You're still becoming. You feel something shift. Attention loosening its grip, as if your spine straightens not from pride but from understanding. Disappointment often grows in the gap between what is and what you think should be. But what if there was no gap? What if this moment was already whole? The fisherman speaks again. There's a quiet nobility in a life lived with care, with simplicity, with devotion to what's right in front of you. You think of Marcus Aurelius writing his meditations by candlelight, not for readers, not for fame, but to sharpen his soul, to remember who he wanted to be when no one was watching. And that's what this feels like. A sharpening, the fire, the sea, the steady voice beside you. It's all sandpaper to the ego, but balm to the soul. Some nights, the fisherman admits, I still feel that ache, that whisper that says, shouldn't you have done more? And I let it speak. I listen kindly, and then I remind it I lived with heart, I gave what I had, and I stayed true to my values. That perhaps is the Stoic measure of success. Not applause, not achievement, integrity. I may never be remembered in books, he says, brushing sand from his knee. But the boy I taught to fish remembers. The woman I helped bury her husband remembers. The sea remembers. And you'll remember this night, this warmth, this truth that doesn't demand belief, only reflection. You breathe in the salt air, let it fill your lungs, then exhale slowly. The disappointment that sat curled in your chest is no longer sharp. It's still there, but gentler now, quieter, like a wave that has already broken. The fisherman leans back, eyes closed again. And in the hush between your next breath and his, you realize, maybe your life isn't meant to be more. Maybe it's meant to be enough. The tide has shifted while you weren't looking. You hear it in the deeper hush of the waves. You feel it in the sand beneath your legs, just slightly damp now, as the ocean inches closer to where you sit by the fire. The fisherman hasn't said much since that last quiet truth. He seems content to let silence take the next turn in your conversation. And so you sit, watching the stars. Some of them are starting to fade behind a veil of light, the first signal of the moon's descent. You feel it too. A shift within you, like sediment settling in clear water, like an old ache loosening its roots. You ever wonder, you ask, why some people get everything and still feel hollow? The fisherman opens one eye, then the other. He smiles, not with amusement but with recognition. Because they think peace comes from acquisition, he says, when really it comes from alignment. You tilt your head. He explains, when your outer life grows faster than your inner one, the imbalance hollows you out. That sits heavy, not in a burdensome way but in a real one. You felt it before, when success felt performative, when the applause died down and left you alone with the silence, when getting what you wanted didn't taste like victory but like sand in your mouth. The Stoics warned against this. Seneca, in one of his letters, wrote that wealth and luxury are not evils in themselves, but unless they serve a virtuous life, they enslave the soul. They become golden chains. Most people are chasing a life that looks good, the fisherman continues, but not one that feels right. You nod because you've been there, climbing ladders that leaned against the wrong wall, following dreams that weren't even yours. And now, you're starting to ask better questions. Not how can I win, but what truly matters if no one's watching. You pick up a shell, run your fingers over its surface. Its curves are smooth, worn not by force but by time. And you wonder what parts of you have been shaped like this, not by dramatic change but by small, invisible moments of letting go. Alignment, you repeat softly. The fisherman murmurs. When who you are, what you believe, and how you act are not at war with each other. You stare into the fire, watching the flames curl and rise, and something clicks into place. That's why the Stoics valued virtue above all else. Not because it made them superior, but because it made them whole. To live with integrity, to speak honestly, act wisely, and desire moderately is to return to yourself, to come home. You ask him if he ever regrets not chasing more. He smiles again, but this time his eyes look off into the dark horizon. I had a friend, he says, who left this island. He wanted riches, titles, a life that shimmered. And did he find it, you ask? He nods. He did. And for a while he was loud with pride. But when he returned years later, he was quieter. He didn't bring back treasure, he brought back questions. What kind of questions? The fisherman gazes into the fire. He asked if it had been worth it, if his soul felt heavier now, if all that noise had drowned out something important. You don't ask what the answers were. You know deep down that they're not meant to be handed over. They're meant to be lived, and you're living yours now. You remember the Stoic distinction between things within your control and things outside of it. The greatest misalignment often comes from trying to force what was never yours to steer. So you begin to ask yourself, gently, what am I holding that doesn't belong to me? What burdens have I confused with duties? What identities have I worn like ill-fitting clothes just because they looked impressive? The fire pops and the fisherman stirs. Your soul, he says, wants to feel true, not impressive. Another paradox, another thread of wisdom to follow. He looks over at you, expression soft. We think the journey is about becoming more, but sometimes it's about unbecoming everything that isn't truly us. You let that echo in your chest, unbecoming, like the tide drawing back, like shedding armor you didn't realize you wore. You feel the truth of it in your bones. You ask if he ever envies the ones who made it big. He chuckles. They envy me too. Everyone envies someone. That's the game, isn't it? But envy is a mirror. It shows you what you think you lack, but not whether it's worth chasing. You think again of Marcus Aurelius, seated in his tent after battle, scribbling notes to himself. A man with absolute power, reminding himself to stay humble, to be just, to not let praise infect his sense of self. That's the kind of alignment you admire. Not a perfect life, but an honest one. The fisherman pours a bit of water onto the fire, calming one of the more eager flames. Steam rises like a breath released. Don't confuse momentum with meaning, he says. Some of the fastest ships are heading nowhere. You sit in stillness, letting that wash over you. The shell in your hand, the fire's warmth, the weight of your own heartbeat, these are not distractions. These are the real things, the anchor points, the soft yes of existence. Alignment, you whisper again, and in that word you find not a demand but an invitation. The sky above deepens to a richer blue, neither night nor morning but something in between. That thin hour where even the stars seem undecided, where your thoughts begin to soften, loosen their grip, and turn inward. The fisherman is quiet now, eyes half-lidded, not quite asleep but folded into himself. And you sit beside him, letting the silence cradle you. The fire has dulled into glowing coals. It no longer burns high. It hums like memory. You glance at him, then ask, not knowing exactly why now, were you ever afraid you'd wasted your life? He doesn't open his eyes. Of course, he says. The fear comes like weather, you don't invite it, you just learn to stand under it. That makes you smile because it's true. Some thoughts don't knock. They arrive like a cold wind, sharp, unexpected, unavoidable. You think of your own life. The projects started and dropped, the relationships that withered, the time spent scrolling, consuming, chasing things you no longer even want. And there it is, that old whisper of shame. But then comes the Stoic reminder. What is past is outside your control. What matters is what you do now. I used to fight that fear, the fisherman says. Try to silence it, prove it wrong, but that only fed it. It grew louder the more I tried to outrun it. So what changed, you ask? I stopped treating it like an enemy. I started treating it like a guest. You blink. Yes, he continues. Like someone who shows up uninvited, but who might still have something to teach you if you listen. You sit with that, letting fear be a guest, not a tyrant, not a truth, but a visitor, one you don't have to believe. One who, like all guests, eventually leaves. This is what the Stoics meant when they spoke of acceptance. Not resignation, not defeat, but seeing things as they are, without ornament or panic. Even if you had wasted years, he says, so what? That doesn't mean this moment is wasted. You nod slowly, feeling the gravity of now, because now is still here, and now is still yours. The fisherman opens his eyes, leans forward slightly, and traces something into the sand, a slow spiral like a galaxy or a shell. We imagine life as a straight line, he says. Start here, end there, but maybe it's more like this. A spiral, returning again and again to what matters, each time a little deeper. You look at the spiral, it's not perfect. The lines wobble a little, shifting with the unevenness of the sand, but it's beautiful because of that, it's real. And you realize, maybe all those so-called wasted moments weren't wasteful. Maybe they were necessary. Maybe they were part of the spiral, the long way around to get back to yourself. Have you heard of the painter who burned all his early work? The fisherman asks suddenly. You shake your head. He said it wasn't because the work was bad, it was because it wasn't true. He had painted what others wanted, what would sell, what would impress. What happened then, you ask? He stopped painting to be seen and started painting to understand. You exhale, long and slow. There is something quietly revolutionary about doing things just for the sake of doing them. Without an audience, without validation, without trying to prove anything. The Stoics believe that virtue is its own reward, that doing the right thing, living with clarity, purpose, and humility, is meaningful even if no one notices. That's what the fisherman has chosen, a life not of noise but of resonance. And now, sitting beside him, you can feel the difference. Noise demands attention. Resonance invites presence. You press your hand into the sand, feel its coolness. You look up. The stars are fading now, one by one, as the edge of dawn teases the horizon. You didn't notice it creeping in, but it's here. So is this sense, subtle but steady, that maybe nothing's been wasted at all. Maybe the delay was the path. Maybe the detours were the point. Maybe you weren't late, you were simply ripening. The fisherman stands, stretches his back with a soft groan, then looks down at you. Let it go, he says. What? You ask. Whatever it is you've been holding, the version of yourself you think you should have become, the weight of being impressive, the guilt for resting. You feel your eyes sting, just a little. He places a hand on your shoulder. You've come far enough tonight. Let yourself arrive. There's nothing more to say, only a breath, a beat, the sound of the sea always returning. And in that sound a soft voice within you whispers, you are not behind, you are not broken, you are not too late, you are here. And that is enough. You wake into the in-between, not fully asleep, not fully awake, just drifting, half cradled by the sea's lullaby, half aware of your breath moving in and out like the tide. The fire is down to embers now, a soft orange pulse in the sand. The fisherman is gone for now, but his presence lingers like warmth in your chest. You don't rush to get up. Instead, you listen to the rhythm of the waves, the distant rustle of leaves, the faint echo of your thoughts beginning to settle. It's quiet but not empty. It's the kind of quiet that asks nothing from you. The kind that simply is. This is the space where insight visits, the liminal, the threshold. You think back to what he said before leaving, "You've come far enough tonight, let yourself arrive." It echoes now with new clarity. Arrival isn't about milestones or endings. It's about allowing yourself to stop running, to stop reaching for a version of peace that's always one achievement away. The Stoics taught this in subtle ways. Epictetus said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life." But he didn't mean the freedom to do anything. He meant the freedom to need nothing, to want wisely, to be whole without external permission. You stare at the stars thinning in the sky, your mind floating into a memory you haven't visited in years. You were a child, sitting in a hallway while the adults argued in the next room. Their voices low and sharp, rising and falling like waves crashing behind a closed door. You remember hugging your knees, trying not to cry, promising yourself that one day, when you were older, never feel powerless again. And now here you are, older, wiser in some ways, still holding that old promise like a relic. But maybe it's time to release it, to let go of the illusion that power comes from control, that if you manage everything perfectly, your job, your relationships, your emotions, you'll finally be safe. The Stoics would remind you, the only true safety lies in your judgment, in how you choose to interpret the world. Control is a fantasy, but clarity, that's within reach. You feel something ease in your chest, a loosening. You sit up slowly, brushing sand from your hands. The ocean meets your gaze without expectation. It doesn't ask you to be exceptional. It just invites you to be. The fisherman returns with a thermos and 2 tin cups. He pours the tea without speaking, hands you one, then lowers himself back beside you. You both sip in silence. Finally, you ask, "How do you stop needing more?" He doesn't answer right away. Then, you realize the craving isn't for more things, it's for more you. The parts of you you've neglected while chasing everything else. You stare into the steam rising from the tea. That hits somewhere deep. He continues, "We live like we're on delay, always waiting for a version of life that's just out of reach. But real peace doesn't arrive in the future. It lives in your ability to meet this moment without flinching." You nod slowly, let it settle. This is the practice, not perfection, not arrival as a single grand event, but presence, moment by moment, choosing not to abandon yourself, not to exile your attention into some imagined better tomorrow. You remember a story the Stoics told. Cato, before his final battle, knowing he would likely lose, sat down and read Plato's Phaedo, not because he thought it would save him, but because he wanted to end his life with a mind rooted in truth, not fear. That's the kind of courage you admire. Not loud, not grand, just steady, quietly choosing what's right even when the world's shouting in another direction. You take another sip of tea. "Sometimes I think I'm just too tired," you say softly. "Too tired to keep trying." The fisherman gives a small nod. "Then don't try in the old way, try gently, try inwardly, try without expectation. Let trying become trusting." You feel the difference in that. Trying says, "I must control the outcome." Trusting says, "I will show up and let life unfold." You close your eyes, the wind brushes your face like a gentle hand. And somewhere deep inside you realize, you're not looking for more anymore. You're looking for enough. And more often than not, it's already here, hidden beneath the noise, waiting quietly in the spaces you've overlooked. You whisper almost to yourself, "Maybe I've been enough all along." The fisherman doesn't respond. He doesn't need to. Sometimes the silence answers best. The tide creeps closer, not with force but like a breath slowly drawn. Its rhythm doesn't ask permission. It simply arrives, then leaves, then arrives again. You watch it for a while, tracing the gentle retreat and return, the soft glimmer left behind on the sand. And it occurs to you, maybe that's how healing works. Not as a permanent state, but as a movement. Not as arrival, but as return. To something inside you that's always been quiet and whole. The fisherman watches too, his hands wrapped around the empty tin cup, his gaze set far beyond the shore. Then he says, almost absent-mindedly, "You know, there were days I hated the sea." You blink, it's hard to imagine. Why? Because it reminded me of how small I was. of how I couldn't control anything, storms, currents, fish, time. I thought I had to master it, but the more I fought, the more I suffered. You nod because you know this feeling. That familiar ache of struggling against what is, trying to bend the world to match your expectations, and breaking yourself in the process. The Stoics call this attachment to externals, the illusion that your peace depends on anything outside of you, praise, possessions, outcomes. And the harder you clutch them, the more you fear losing them. It's not the having that binds you, it's the need. I kept asking the sea to change, the fisherman says, when all along it was asking me to listen. The fire sputters. A single ember escapes, glowing briefly before dimming into ash. You remember a moment from your own life, standing at a crossroads, faced with a decision that would change everything. You tried to predict every consequence, tried to calculate the perfect choice. But all it did was leave you paralyzed, afraid of getting it wrong. But the Stoics taught something different, that the right choice isn't always the one with the best result. It's the one made with clarity, courage, and virtue. Whatever happens after is not yours to control. That idea scared you once. But now, under this sky, beside this man who has let so much fall away, you begin to see its freedom. You can do what's right without needing things to go right. That's where true power lies, not in domination but in detachment. In the ability to move forward even when the road is foggy, even when the waves rise. The fisherman picks up a small rock, turns it in his hand. There's a kind of peace that only comes after you've lost enough to know what matters. You think of your own losses, some small, some sharp, the job that didn't work out, the friendship that slowly faded, the identity you once wore like armor, now too heavy to carry. At the time, you saw these as failures. Now maybe they were doorways. This is the paradox the Stoics point to again and again, that the things we cling to for safety often become our cages, and the letting go, though painful, is where the freedom begins. Do you miss your old life, you ask? The fisherman smiles. Sometimes, but mostly I miss the idea of it, the version I carried in my head, the man I thought I had to be. And now I just try to be the man who's here. A soft breeze moves through the trees. The stars begin to fade as a pale glow creeps into the eastern sky. You realize the night is thinning, but you're not anxious for it to end. Something has settled in you. Not a solution, not an answer, but a presence. A stillness that wasn't there before. You look at the fisherman. Is this it? You ask. Is this what freedom feels like? He considers the question. Freedom, he says slowly, isn't the absence of need. It's the presence of self. When you stop outsourcing your worth, when you stop waiting for the world to hand you peace, you begin to carry it with you. You close your eyes. Let the words sink in. Maybe this is the beginning of that kind of freedom. Not flashy, not sudden, but quiet, earned moment by moment, choice by choice, breath by breath. The sea doesn't roar, it whispers. And in that whisper, you hear something you've longed to believe. You don't need to become someone else to be whole. You only need to return to who you already are. The sky grows softer. Light seeps through the edges of night like warm milk poured into dark tea. There's no fanfare, just the gradual, graceful birth of morning. It reminds you of something the fisherman said earlier about not rushing healing, about letting things unfold in their own time. You exhale deeply, noticing the tension you've been holding in your shoulders. How long has it been there? You stretch your arms slowly, letting them fall with the weight of someone who doesn't need to prove anything anymore. The fisherman speaks, almost in a murmur. Most people never stop long enough to feel where their life is happening. You glance over. Where is it happening? He looks at you, not with authority but with a strange kind of humility, and says, right now. Always right now. That sounds simple. Too simple, maybe. But as the wind brushes past your face and the tea in your cup turns lukewarm, you realize he's not offering a theory. He's pointing to something you can feel. The Stoics weren't obsessed with the future. They weren't even especially interested in the past. Their focus, relentlessly, gently, was the present moment. Because that's all you ever truly own. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself. Do not waste what remains of your life in speculating about others. It is not the future or the past that afflicts you, but always the present. He didn't mean it as a warning. He meant it as an invitation. The fisherman rises, stretches his back. The joints crack, but there's no complaint. You stand too, not because you're ready, but because the body sometimes knows before the mind does. It's time to move again. Not forward, just inward, still. You begin walking along the shore, bare feet brushing the damp line where waves kiss sand. Each step becomes a kind of prayer, a wordless remembering. You reflect on something strange. How often you've confused movement with progress. How often you ran toward goals not because they mattered, but because standing still made you feel exposed, vulnerable, behind. But the Stoics remind you that standing still is not the same as being stuck. In fact, stillness is often the bravest thing you can choose. It means facing your thoughts, your stories, your fears, without distraction. You pause to watch a seagull wheel across the sky. It's not going anywhere in particular. It rides the wind as it is, and something in you exhales again. I used to think wisdom was a destination, you say aloud. The fisherman nods. We all do, until we realize it's a direction. He stops and picks up a small shell, smooth and ridged. This was made over years, tiny layer after layer, not rushed, not forced, just formed by being where it was. You take the shell, it fits neatly in your palm, light but solid, quiet but undeniable. Then he asks, can you feel the difference now? You're not sure what he means. The difference between wanting to possess peace and simply being in it. You do feel something. It's not the surge of a breakthrough, not the thrill of a revelation. It's subtler, like sitting down after a long walk, like hearing your own breath and realizing it's been faithful all along. You realize that your old chase, for more, for clarity, for a future version of yourself, was never wrong. It was just misguided. You weren't chasing peace. You were trying to earn permission to stop chasing. The fisherman doesn't speak again for a while. The wind rises slightly, lifting his hair, rustling the edges of his coat. Then, there's a kind of wisdom that grows only in the silence between questions. When you finally stop demanding answers and just start listening. You listen now to the rhythm of the waves, the distant call of a bird, the rustle of leaves. And something quieter still, your own heartbeat patient and calm. There's nothing to fix in this moment, nothing to change, just the quiet dignity of being. And for the first time in a long while, that feels like enough. The fisherman places a hand lightly on your shoulder. Let's go, he says. You don't ask where. It doesn't matter anymore. You follow the fisherman inland where the shoreline yields to tall grass and soft earth. The sun is awake now, though it stretches its rays slowly, like someone rising without urgency. A pale gold warms the edges of the world. There's no path, just worn earth beneath your feet and a sense of quiet purpose in each step. The fisherman doesn't look back, but you feel his presence guiding, not leading. It's different. And isn't that what you've longed for all along? Not someone to follow blindly, but someone to walk beside while you learn to trust your own feet. You pass a crooked fence, half swallowed by vines. Birds burst from the brush and their wings make a sound like applause. You pause for a moment, then walk on. The silence is comfortable. Finally, the fisherman breaks it. Do you know what desire really is? You hesitate, wanting something. He half smiles. Closer than most, but it's more than that. Desire is a contract you make with yourself to be unhappy until you get what you want. You feel the truth of that, not just in your mind, but in your stomach, your chest, your throat. All those places where unmet longing tends to live. The Stoics taught that desire itself isn't the problem. It's our unexamined attachment to outcomes. When we tie our happiness to something beyond our control, we make ourselves hostages. Seneca once wrote, "If you wish to be happy, wish for nothing that depends on fortune." And fortune, as they meant it, wasn't just luck. It was everything that lies outside the will. Other people's actions, circumstances, even your own body. You've spent years, maybe, building a life on fragile ground, hoping the right job, partner, recognition, or lifestyle would deliver peace. But now, in the company of this man who's owned so little and understood so much, you begin to wonder, what if peace was never meant to be pursued? What if it was only meant to be uncovered? You come to a small clearing. The fisherman kneels, brushes aside dead leaves, and uncovers a worn stone circle, an old fire pit. "This was here long before me," he says, "and it'll be here long after." You sit beside him, legs crossed, palms open. It's strange how natural that feels. "Do you regret leaving your old life?" you ask again, softer this time. He shrugs. "I don't think about it much. Regret's just another version of desire, wishing the past were different." You think back on your own regrets. The words you didn't say, the things you said too harshly, the version of yourself you wish you could rewind and reshape. But doesn't it matter, you ask? What we've done, what we've failed to do. "Of course it matters," he says. "But dwelling on it doesn't change it. Only how we live now can redeem it." There's a pause, and then he adds, "The Stoics weren't perfect. They got things wrong like everyone else. But they knew that wisdom isn't about being right. It's about responding rightly." You pick up a small stick and begin tracing circles in the dirt, around and around, then slowly stop. The paradox settles in again. That surrender isn't giving up, it's stepping into responsibility. Not the responsibility to control everything, just the responsibility to choose your stance, your posture, your presence. In that moment, a deeper understanding ripples through you. That true freedom, the kind no one can take away, isn't found in getting what you want. It's in releasing the need for anything other than what is. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop clinging. You watch the fisherman place a few twigs in the old fire pit. He doesn't light them, just arranges them with care. "I used to think life was about building," he says. "Now I think it's more about tending." You don't ask what he means, you already feel it. To tend to your inner life, to your choices, to your breath. Like a small flame sheltered from wind, not because it's weak but because it's precious. You sit together in silence, letting the morning grow. And though nothing grand has happened, no visions, no revelations, you realize something profound. You feel peaceful, not the peace of a solved puzzle, the peace of not needing to solve it anymore. By mid-morning, the sun is no longer shy. It spills over the treetops with a confident glow, casting long, soft-edged shadows that sway as you walk. The ground beneath your feet is warm now, quietly alive. The fisherman carries a small satchel now, though you didn't see where it came from. It bumps gently against his hip with each step. You don't ask what's inside. You no longer feel the need to fill every silence with questions. That's new. He gestures toward a fallen log, half sunk into the moss. You sit without speaking, letting the moment hold its own weight. Then he says, "Do you remember when you first started rushing?" You blink, rushing. He nods, doing things quickly to catch up to some invisible measure of enoughness. You think for a while, maybe it was when you began comparing. When someone else's life, shinier, louder, more curated, started to look like a mirror of what you lacked. Or maybe it was fear. Fear that if you didn't hurry, you'd fall behind, be left behind. The fisherman watches your thoughts like someone observing the tide, not trying to stop them, just noticing the rise and fall. He says, "I used to think speed was strength, that doing more meant being more. But speed without direction is just drifting faster." And there it is again, a Stoic principle in a fisherman's voice. To the Stoics, ataraxia, a state of unshaken tranquility, didn't come from achievement but from alignment. When your actions reflect your values and your values are grounded in reason, not impulse, then peace follows like a shadow. You pick at a piece of bark, its texture rough in your hand. But how do you know your direction is right? The fisherman leans back. You don't, but you can ask better questions. Not will this succeed, but is this in harmony with who I want to be? That lands. It softens something sharp inside. You realize how often your compass was popularity, productivity, applause. No wonder you spun in circles. He continues. Even Marcus Aurelius, ruler of an empire, wrote daily reminders to himself not to be distracted by the noise of praise or the panic of the crowd. because he knew that freedom isn't found in power, it's found in restraint. You look out at the forest beyond. No trails, no signs, just nature being nature, effortless in its unfolding. The fisherman reaches into his satchel and pulls out a piece of fruit, an old pear, slightly bruised. He offers it to you. You accept it without hesitation. It's sweet, imperfect, enough. He takes a bite of his own, then wipes the juice from his beard. I've learned this. Not every decision needs to be optimized. Some things are better when you leave room for imperfection. You nod slowly. Maybe for the first time in years, you're not calculating the trade-off of a moment. You're just in it. And that's when the contradiction creeps in again. By letting go of trying to make everything meaningful, it all begins to feel meaningful. You chuckle softly, the fisherman notices. What? He asks. Nothing, you say, just remembering how tightly I used to hold on. He smiles, then says something unexpected. Let go too much and you float away. Hold too tight and you sink. Another paradox, but this one doesn't bother you. It soothes you. Like the way a tree stands firm because it bends with the wind, like how strength is sometimes the courage to remain gentle. The two of you rise again. You walk slowly, not toward anything in particular. You begin to notice the small things, a spider web glinting in sunlight, the low hum of bees, the faint trail of scent from crushed pine needles. You don't capture it, don't post about it, don't label it, you just live it. And in that quiet presence, something shifts. You are no longer chasing stillness. You are starting to become it. The trail becomes thinner, almost disappearing into the forest's breath. The trees here are older, their bark thick with time. They arch over the path like ancient sentinels, filtering the sunlight into a hush of golden dust. The fisherman walks slower now, his pace more reflective than tired. You match him without speaking. The stillness between you feels full, not empty. At one point, he stops to observe a line of ants crossing a route. Even they know where they're going, he says, a twinkle in his eye. But I wonder, do they ever ask why? You smile. Another one of his quiet riddles. The Stoics spoke often of teleology, the idea that everything has a nature, a purpose. But they warn not to confuse doing with being. Not every movement is meaningful, and not every question needs an answer. You find a fallen feather mottled with age. You spin it in your hand, watching it catch the light. Fragile, light, detached yet whole. How did you learn all this, you ask? The fisherman looks at you. By forgetting everything I thought I knew. That makes you pause. He sits on a mossy stone and gestures for you to do the same. Let me tell you a story, he says, voice low, almost blending with the breeze. There was a man who spent his whole life trying to be wise. He read every book, sat with every teacher, collected every quote. But the more he studied, the more afraid he became of being wrong. So he spoke less and less, trying not to make mistakes. One day he died with a head full of knowledge and a heart full of hesitation. You nod slowly. You've known that fear, the paralysis of overthinking, of needing everything to make sense before you act, before you live. But there was another man, he continues, who also sought wisdom. He read some, yes, but mostly he observed. His own mind, the trees, the way water finds the lowest point. He made peace with not knowing. He laughed at his own confusion, and in that looseness he found clarity. The Stoics knew this too. Epictetus reminded his students that philosophy wasn't about sounding clever, it was about learning to live well. And to live well meant practicing humility daily. Not fake modesty, but real openness. I do not know, but I will stay present, and I will choose well. The fisherman tosses a small stone into the underbrush. The rustle fades quickly. You know, he says, people often ask me what the meaning of life is. You raise your eyebrows. And what do you say? He shrugs. I say, why does it need to be one thing? You laugh more freely than you have in days. But beneath the humor, something profound stirs. This old need for a singular answer, a linear purpose, might have been a trap. Maybe life isn't meant to be solved like a puzzle. Maybe it's to be witnessed, lived, revisited like a song, not dissected like a machine. You sit in that space a while, just breathing. The fisherman eventually stands, brushing dust from his hands. We're almost there. You don't ask where. You're learning not to. As you walk, a memory surfaces, a younger version of yourself working late into the night, making lists, setting goals, believing deeply that peace would come after the launch, after the milestone, after the apology, after you fixed yourself. And yet here, no milestones, no plans, no solutions. You feel closer to peace than ever before. How strange, how liberating. You look over at the fisherman. His steps are small now but deliberate. You think of how much time you've spent resisting the present, wanting to be elsewhere elsewhen. But now, walking slowly beside this man who's shown you nothing but simplicity, you begin to realize, maybe presence isn't something you earn. Maybe it's something you return to. The clearing ahead opens gently, not with grandeur but with grace. The fisherman stops, and so do you. He turns to face you, and for a moment the wind stills. "This is where we part," he says softly. You feel the words settle into your chest like a quiet stone dropped in water. You don't ask him to stay. You don't need to, because something in you has shifted. Something has awakened, not as a thunderclap but as a steady pulse. You nod. Not as farewell, but as acknowledgement. You step forward alone now, not away from him, but toward yourself. And even though nothing has changed in the world around you, you know you have. You walk into the clearing. The air feels thinner here, lighter, as if it too has been practicing detachment. Tall grasses sway gently, brushing against your legs like old friends welcoming you home. There's no grand revelation waiting, no fireworks of insight. Just this quiet field bordered by trees under a sky that no longer seems so distant. You breathe in, then out, nothing special, but isn't that the point? You've chased so many versions of more. More clarity, more status, more meaning. You thought arrival would feel like a crescendo. Instead, it feels like a soft exhale. And this exhale, this peace is enough. There's a stone at the center of the clearing, flat, worn by time. You sit on it, letting your legs dangle, feeling the stillness settle deeper. A dragonfly buzzes past your ear. A bird calls from somewhere unseen. Everything around you continues, unconcerned with your arrival. And somehow that's comforting.